To get things started, I want to welcome everybody to our introductory webinar to Youth Participatory Action Research. My name is Liz Thorne. I am the Adolescent Health Policy and Assessment Specialist in the Adolescent and School Health Program here in the Public Health Division. And we are really happy and excited to be with you on this webinar today. And so I'm going to start off just giving a little brief background on why we are in the Public Health Division interested in youth participatory action research, and then introduce our guests and panelists today. So in adolescent and school health, we really subscribe to and support the theory and philosophy of positive youth development. The idea that young people are more than just a collection of risks that need to be diminished, but instead have a lot of strengths and values that we can support, such as certain core attributes like character, connection, caring, competence, and confidence, often referred to as the 5 C's of positive youth development, and that these key protective factors can be supported in all youth and have a lot of impacts on a variety of health outcomes, whether it be mental health, substance use, educational attainment, smoking, or sexual activity, that we're really interested in from a public health perspective. And we at the Public Health Division have really focused on youth participatory action research, or YPAR for short, as one strategy to authentically engage young people in policies and programs that impact their lives, and also build strong and authentic youth-adult partnerships to support positive youth development on a broader level. And so to that end, we have done some youth participatory action research projects in the past, and over the past year or so have been working with our partners at the Institute for Community Research to update and adapt one of their curricula to develop a curriculum for Oregon called the Youth Participatory Action Research Curriculum Adapted for Oregon. And that was just released last month and is available on our website. And this webinar is really a first step in rolling that out. And we're also really pleased to be able to fund and support a number of our school-based health centers in Oregon and 4 community organizations to pilot test the implementation of this curriculum focused on mental health. And this webinar is really kicking off that work. So I am thrilled to introduce our partners in this endeavor and your panelists today. They're from the Institute for Community Research, which is an independent nonprofit center based in Hartford, Connecticut, which builds community partnerships to conduct research on key issues affecting the community. The Institute's Youth Participatory Action Research Program is nationally recognized and has been extensively evaluated and documented. Since 1989, ICR has been using YPAR as an approach for positive youth development, improved school attachment, service learning, civic engagement, youth-adult partnerships, and social justice for vulnerable youth. Our first panelist today is Heather Mosier, a social and community psychologist and research associate at ICR with expertise in community engagement and participatory action research. She has extensive experience conducting PAR in collaboration with youth and adults across a range of community settings. With a background as a professional documentary filmmaker, she specializes in integrating the use of visual research methods in action research as a means to enhance documentation, analysis, and impact of the findings through more accessible and engaging research. Our second panelist is Zuli Morales. She is a prevention researcher and educator with ICR's Participatory Action Research Program. She specializes in developing and implementing curricula for youth and has extensive experience working with teens in high schools. She has a long-standing relationship with the ICR, having been a youth participant in multiple participatory action research projects to now being a facilitator and program coordinator. Our third panelist is Jean Schenzel, and she is Senior Scientist and Founding Director at ICR. She initiated the Participatory Action Research Program for youth and adults in 1988 and has continued to support them with funding, curriculum, and collaboration since that time. She is the initiating author of the ICR Youth Participatory Action Research Curriculum, from which we have adapted ours, on empowering youth, and the co-author and senior editor of the Ethnographer's Toolkit, a 7-volume set of books that outline ethnographic methods for youth and adults in community settings. And finally, Dan Jordan is a prevention researcher and educator with ICR's Participatory Action Research Program. He specializes in developing and implementing YPAR curriculum for youth, as well as process and outcome evaluation. Dan has extensive experience working with youth in high schools, GED programs, and other educational settings. Now I'm going to turn it over to Heather to get us started. We're just going to switch control of our screen here.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Take it away, Heather.
Great, great. Well, thanks, Liz, and thank you all for being here. We're really excited to be part of this. So we have 4 main goals for this webinar today. The first is to provide you with an introduction to youth participatory action research, which we'll refer to as YPAR for the rest of the presentation. During the webinar, we'll also discuss how to build safe and productive settings to lay the foundation for YPAR, and also present best practices in facilitation based on the literature and also ICR's 25 years of experience in conducting YPAR. Then we'll also describe some common challenges that are somewhat unique to YPAR and provide some guidance on how to overcome these challenges when they arise. So I'm going to start out with the first goal of the webinar. There we go, we got the slide to advance, and provide you with an introduction to the YPAR approach. So I think a good place to start is to tell you a little bit about the history of YPAR. YPAR has its roots in participatory action research and also in positive youth development. At the heart of PAR, as you may know, is the issue of power, inequities, and social justice, and the critique that marginalized groups who are most affected by these inequities are often not included in knowledge making or in decision making to address these issues. So the goal of PAR is to change these power dynamics, and so communities become equal partners in research rather than as subjects or participants in research. And the focus is then to really work in solidarity with these groups who directly have experienced these inequalities to bring this knowledge to light in order to change these inequities. YPAR also, with its youth focus, is rooted in positive youth development. So PYD has really redefined how young people are being understood and engaged, really shifting the paradigm in which institutions work with youth so that the focus is on building on the strengths of youth and engaging youth as partners in decision making around issues that directly affect them. So what is YPAR? It's a collective approach to research, number one, and it builds on youth experience and involves youth as partners in action research process to address real-life problems identified and defined by youth. So let's break it down and talk about the core features of YPAR and in what ways it differs from traditional research. So like conventional science, YPAR uses systematic investigation to gather new knowledge about how something works or how to change something. Like other forms of research, YPAR utilizes a range of rigorous research methods, anywhere from using mapping, observation, interviews, and other methods. YPAR in particular, though, like other participatory and qualitative research, recognizes lived experience as an important source of knowledge. Unlike traditional research where the expertise comes from researchers, in YPAR youth are recognized as experts on issues that are directly affecting their lives, and youth are engaged as partners in research. And YPAR really builds on the strengths of youth, and youth and adults share in the decision making. Those are like the core features of YPAR. In our model, YPAR strives for the tip of the ladder of youth participation. It's youth-initiated and shared decisions with adults. The youth-driven approach is based on the premise that young people become active participants and learners when they hold the lead. And the goal of this approach is really to empower and promote youth leadership development, providing opportunities for youth voice, opportunities for youth to take the lead in all stages of the research, in particular starting from identifying the issue for action research based on what's really significant to their lives. Youth are also informed in all the other aspects of the data collection, the analyses, the implementing action that is really informed by the research process. So they're involved in all phases of the process as equal partners, just to emphasize that again. Another feature of participation in YPAR is that it's not just about individual learning or individual participation, that it's also focused on promoting a collective or a collective empowerment through teamwork and mutual learning. In YPAR, an explicit goal of the inquiry is to generate knowledge that is actionable, which means that the purpose is to have direct impact for social change. Another feature of YPAR is that there is an explicit link between action and research. So research informs action, and action then informs our research. And the idea is to really learn about how to change an issue through studying how things change as a result of our intentional actions. And I'll talk about that later in terms of the iterative process that we take using YPAR. If you can move to, yeah. So all these pieces, of course, work together in YPAR. So let's talk a little bit about how we actually do it and how action and research are really integrated in this process. So as you can see by this diagram, YPAR is an iterative process based on continuous cycles of observing or collecting data, reflecting and analyzing the data, planning and implementing the action based on the knowledge that was generated or the things that you learned about the issue, and then learning, in other words observing, whether our action had the intended impact. And then the cycle, as you can see, starts again in an iterative process, reflecting on that learning and observation, and then continuing to plan and act in an ongoing cycle to both understand and ultimately affect change. YPAR is grounded in the belief that we can learn more about how to solve real-life problems if we're studying it while trying to change it, and that we really learn through this kind of real-world experimentation. So if you look at the figure, it's really illustrating our model of YPAR at ICR, and it's depicting 3 dimensions of purposeful action, and you can see the 3 dimensions on the purple lines. On the y-axis is building evidence or knowledge. Sorry about that with the slide. On the x-axis, sorry, I don't know if I said x, but the x-axis is building evidence or knowledge, which is a core goal of any research. And in YPAR, building evidence is really important for learning how to target actions that will have impact and help us solve the issue or the problem. But building evidence is also linked with the y-axis, building allies, because we're more likely to convince others to join us in our efforts if we have credible evidence about what is really causing the problem and how best to change it. On the y-axis, as I was saying, is building allies. We know that system change comes through coordination and collaboration among actors in a system. So identifying and reaching out to stakeholders is really important in this process. First, we can learn from stakeholders about different aspects of the problem, including barriers and mechanisms to change it. Second, social change happens through collective effort and includes a range of system stakeholders to make it happen. So it's really important to engage allies in the PAR process from the very beginning, sharing results along the way and working with them to develop and implement change strategies. So you can kind of see in the diagram as a whole, the ultimate goal of the YPAR process is to improve strategic action for system change, and this happens through this iterative process that I've just described, where you're gaining a deep and holistic understanding of the problem, refining your actions to improve strategies that are based on an ongoing evaluation of what works and what doesn't work, and then working in collaboration with key allies to change dynamics in productive ways to promote social change. So let's talk about the major phases of YPAR. And these modules that you have in your curriculum also follow these these 5 major phases. The phases really start with laying the foundation and building the team. Then the second really important phase is identifying the issue that the team will be working together to change. And the next major phases really involve planning the action research, collecting and analyzing the data, and then using the data for social change. And I want to just talk about this just for a little bit, in the sense that all of these phases are really tied to furthering action toward achieving a goal that was identified by the group. And then action can sometimes get confused as meaning the same thing as using data for social change. This is obviously definitely a form of action, but action really shouldn't be something that only happens at the end of the project. The action should be really an ongoing, as it's really important to each phase. So for example, I'll give you an example. In data collection in the analysis phase, really thinking about engaging key stakeholders in ways that can help in moving the action forward. This means that you would plan for action research, planning for action research would involve selecting a combination of research methods that would allow you to not only build evidence, but also build allies. So there's specific research methods or combinations of research methods that you could use. For example, interviews would allow you to really interact and talk with and learn from individual key stakeholders in the community. Focus group mapping, there are types of research methods that are very interactive. There are many ways that you can use data for social change, and I won't discuss this table in detail. It's pretty big. It is in your curriculum, however. But I just wanted to show you the range of strategies that can be used that includes education, advocacy, policy change initiatives, and also the development of intervention strategies. So I hope this has given you a really broad and very quick overview of YPAR. Zuli, Dan, and Jay, Jean goes by Jay, and just in case that gets confusing, we'll be talking more about some of the specifics of conducting YPAR, but before moving on to that, we'd like to take 5 minutes to answer questions that have been posed in the chat box during the presentation, if there are any questions.
This is Liz. So we didn't have any questions come in through the chat box, so I think we are safe to go ahead and move on to the next presenter.
Great.
So right now we're going to shift control of the screen to Zuli, who will be our next presenter. So give us just a second while we switch it up. All right, Zuli.
Hi. Am I coming through all right?
You are. We hear you great.
Awesome. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about is building a safe and productive setting for YPAR. What this includes is there's going to be 3 major processes I'm going to be speaking more about. The first one is building a cohesive group. The second point would be equalizing group dynamics through shared decision-making, and lastly, creating an environment that promotes mutual learning where people are learning from each other and assisting others in developing skills and building on strengths. So group building, the way we've defined group building is the use of group processes to strengthen social relationships and build collective identity and functioning. This includes, obviously, building collective identity and collective purpose. It helps to form social bonds. It promotes dialogue and multiple perspectives, creates a safe space for sharing personal experiences, and facilitates productive participation. This is important. In group building, it's important to balance out individual identity with a group identity. During this time, the facilitator helps to shape their own role in the group by obviously leading in group building activities, but also by participating in those activities. There is a good amount of time given and dedicated to this aspect of PAR in the beginning because it lays the groundwork for productive participation. There is more investment into the team when participants know who is in the room and gets to share about themselves. When individuals are able to describe their identities and speak on their personal experiences, it forms bonds with other teammates and the facilitator. It brings information out that can be useful later on in issue identification and gets the teens thinking about how their own identity fits into other larger social structures. Creating a safe space where youth feel free to open up about themselves encourages communication about issues that they see, experiences they've had in their own lives, and what impact it has had on them and their communities. What it looks like. First off, folks should be having fun and laughing, freely expressing alternative views, actively listening to one another, communicating respectfully, sharing responsibility, and actively participating in group and group activities. When group building is done effectively, there's a lot of dialogue within the group, among group members, and with the facilitator. The youth feel free to express their opinions in the space, knowing that they have established a groundwork of respect and trust with their teammates. The importance of actively listening, responding, working together, and participating are all stressed with these activities. When the youth feel connected to one another and to the facilitator, they feel more engaged and accepted within the group. From the beginning, this is important to establish because it lays the foundation for PAR work. Establishing trust in the smaller group, learning about each other's experiences, and respecting diverse points of views are all skills that translate later on into the larger scope of work that is done with PAR. When youth are out in the field, they will be seeking to engage the community and community members. Effective ways to do this are shaped through the skills and experience they gain from group building activities. Some of those activities include journal writing, Skittles, which is in the curriculum on page 24, having an open mic, a minefield activity, which I'll explain in a bit, and creating a group name. Ideally, group building activities are done throughout the PAR process, and these activities should vary from individual ones to larger group activities. In this way, the youth can learn about one another in a range of ways, from one-on-one fun fact sharing all the way to how they identify as a whole team. There are group building activities that are meant for individuals to reflect on their own experiences, such as writing in journals where they get to share their own personal thoughts on daily activities and/or respond to prompts given to them by the facilitator. And they may have the chance to share what they wrote with the larger group. Other group building activities include icebreakers meant for the youth to learn about one another, such as Skittles, where the youth respond to predetermined questions meant to get at fun facts about themselves, such as their favorite books, hobbies, etc. Then there are group building activities that highlight skills that translate into a respectful and productive working environment, such as communication, teamwork, and problem solving. Activities such as Minefield, where the team has to silently communicate with one another while working to get all of their teammates across a grid with hidden quote-unquote mines, is an example of one of these activities. Again, a balance is necessary. You want to acknowledge individuals for their contributions and acknowledge the group as a whole for their work. Sometimes the individual can get lost in the group, and sometimes the group gets lost with a focus on individuals. Activities that help create a group identity include coming up with a group name. For example, a group of youth I work with in Meriden worked as a team to decide on the name, the Meriden Action Researchers, or MARS for short. Together, they also designed business cards to give out and team t-shirts to wear when out in the field. Activities like these assist in creating their collective identity. Group building activities are also important in challenging times when tensions are high in the group or there is a need to refocus. Activities requiring teamwork can help to build up group morale. Shared decision-making, we've defined it as a collaborative process where both the facilitator and the participants work towards consensus when making decisions. This offers opportunities for youth to gain experience in decision-making, promotes voice to individual and shared experiences, develops authentic youth-adult partnerships, and reduces power differences. Similar to how PAR addresses the issue of unequal power distribution, it is vital to address this in the group. The facilitator, being seen as the leader, the boss, or simply in being the adult in the room, can be viewed as a power holder. To address this, youth need to be informed of the collaborative partnership that will be happening with them and the facilitator. This is important to model early on for the youth in that they're encouraged to give input, make decisions, ask questions, and so forth. The work is representative of them. They are representative of their communities, and many times the facilitator is not. Therefore, their engagement in the decision-making process is key. Shared decision-making is important because it empowers youth to be leaders within their own group and within their community. Shared decision making. The way that it could look is youth can take on the role of leading or facilitating an activity for the rest of the group. They can take on leadership roles within their team, for example, in small group work activities. They encourage others to step up and actively participate, which involves input, contributing to the conversation, critically thinking about the information being presented, and offering alternatives to reach consensus with the group. These leadership skills translate to activities that youth participate in outside of the PAR meeting space as well. For example, when meeting with stakeholders, which included principals, Board of Education representatives, funders, and the Commissioner of Public Health in Meriden, the youth took the lead in presenting their work and then facilitating a sort of focus group with questions they had created beforehand to ask these stakeholders. Typically in situations where youth are presenting, questions are asked of them, and usually by adults. By organizing the meeting so that the youth were in a position of deciding on questions, structuring the meeting so that they created space to ask, and then asking these questions to adults with status helped to equalize the interaction between them. So activities that help strengthen partnership are daily activity rating sheets, youth-adult stereotypes, which is also in the curriculum on page 55, and agreements. And actually all of section 4 in the curriculum would be good around this. Just like group building, shared decision making is done throughout the PAR process, so from the very beginning, and should start as early as day 1. For example, in PAR projects, the youth were asked to list a set of agreements that they could all adhere to, as opposed to having the facilitator coming in with predetermined set of rules. Consequences for going back on an agreement were also discussed and implemented. Another activity that assists in group decision making is utilizing daily activity rating sheets. On these sheets, youth are asked to rate the main activities of the day on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 meaning that they loved it and 1 meaning that they didn't necessarily connect with it. They are then asked questions pertaining to what they learned about their work, what they learned about the group, and feedback on the activities themselves. If it went well, what was it about that activity that made it great? If they had a hard time connecting to the activity, how can it be changed, modified, or improved upon? This is a way of letting the youth know we're looking for their input and take into consideration their thoughts and feedback when creating future activities and for building the program. An activity in the curriculum that can bring the topic of decision-making to the forefront is youth-adult stereotypes on page 55. This would be a good way to address preconceived notions adults and teens have of each other, including ideas as to who makes the decisions. Techniques important in shared decision-making include taking turns while speaking, actively listening, excuse me, I have to cough, sorry, asking questions of other group members, the facilitator encouraging questions of ideas among youth, showing youth how to add ideas to what someone else is saying while still respecting that person's idea. Things to still consider are the power that a facilitator still has in the PAR process and the setting in which the PAR group is taking place. For example, if it's in a school, a health department, or a community center, or so on, some of these spaces may have their own set of regulations or code of conduct. Excuse me. I will now be getting into mutual learning. So mutual learning is defined as a dynamic and mutually beneficial process of peer-to-peer learning, youth learning from adults, and adults learning from youth. This includes acknowledging individual strengths, acknowledging team strengths, acknowledging questions of one another, providing feedback or constructive criticism, and using personal experiences. In our groups, we want youth to be equal partners while recognizing that individuals bring different sets of skills and a variety of knowledge. Some youth may be ahead or behind in different parts of the experience. Therefore, youth need support from their peers, and this can come in the form of teaching one another, asking questions, and working together as a team. Not only are the youth learning from the facilitator, they are also learning from one another while the facilitator learns from them, such as learning new communication methods, i.e. social media. The facilitator acts like a bridge between the experiences and information the youth have or provide and the expertise and knowledge the facilitator themselves bring. The facilitator makes connections between what the youth already know and helps them explore what they don't and identify what they want to learn. What it should look like. Youth should feel comfortable asking questions to one another. They should feel comfortable asking the facilitator questions. Many times in past experiences we've encountered youth afraid to inquire about something or afraid to ask something that they think they should already know the answer to. The facilitator should be asking questions to the youth, particularly things that the facilitator genuinely doesn't know the response to, for example, what it's like being a youth in their community. And the youth should ask and give help to one another. Group learning is also occurring, and there's constant checking in for consensus and clarity to know that everyone is on the same page. Activities that promote mutual learning include multiple intelligences, which is an activity that explains and helps youth identify different ways that individuals learn, which includes interpersonally, kinesthetically, so through movement, and musically. There's a puzzle piece game, which is in the curriculum on page 31. And another activity would be having youth facilitate their own icebreaker. When they create their own icebreaker, they learn from the facilitator how to create their own agenda, which includes a list of materials, how to write out steps, what the learning goal of the icebreaker is, and so on. This piece of it is the youth learning from the facilitator. The youth then runs the icebreaker, so they are teaching their peers while also experiencing the role of facilitating. And afterwards, the rest of the youth are asked to fill out a sheet with some feedback for their teammate that ran the icebreaker. Thus, they are gaining experience and are able to use constructive criticism the next time that they run an activity, so they're learning from their peers. So to sum, each of these components that I just went through flow into one another. Group building helps create a safe and respectful environment where the members are getting to know one another, and this foundation allows for shared decision-making, which then encourages mutual group learning. So I will now open up the floor to if anyone has any questions.
So it looks like we didn't have any questions come in through the questions box. So at this point, I think we are good to move on to Jay. So right now we will get Jay's screen up. Should be coming up shortly. Okay. So we have Jay's screen up. It looks like you need to open up the PowerPoint in your computer. There it is.
Okay. I just got some help from a peer educator. Okay, hi everybody. My topic today is called Best Practices in Facilitating, and I think there's another word there which I can't see. So the most important thing to think about in terms of my comments is that participatory action research is a form of experiential learning. It's a form of group education leading to social action, and I think it's really important to think about it as education. So whoever is facilitating YPAR is participating in creating an educational environment in which teens are learning, and they are learning to build their own learning environment with the support of supportive facilitators. So that's what I'm going to be talking about here. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about just some experiences that we've had with teen learning, and then some thoughts from the literature that have to do, and also our own experiences around facilitation of really positive and engaging and interactive and empowering learning experiences with teens. First of all, we have made some assumptions about how teens learn. So the first point that it's always good to keep in mind is that teens, just like adults and smaller children, learn in lots of different ways. We like to use the term multiple intelligences. Really what that means is that youth engage with their environment, take information in, and exchange through they have their favorite ways of doing it, ways that they're comfortable with. For example, some kids are more physical in the way that they engage with the environment. They like to move a lot. Others use linear logic. Others prefer to learn and express themselves through art. So when we create learning environments and youth PAR activities, we like to think about these different ways of learning so that everybody has a chance to use both what they're comfortable and skilled at and also what they're not so comfortable with so they can extend. It's probably obvious that teens like to identify with what they're learning, so the youth PAR experience is an authentic learning situation that comes from both their own lived experience and the setting that they're in, and it extends from that. Teens like to have fun. Some adults don't like to have fun as much as teens do. So we adults have to learn how to have fun with teens. But anyway, thinking about what is enjoyable through interactive exercises that offer an opportunity to learn and also to play through games, through direct experience, through creating models, through doing installations, through putting on play, theater, poetry. Those are all good ways to have fun while learning. Teens also learn from their environment. They learn from watching their peers. So peer, as Julie just described, peer education, the group setting is a really productive environment for youth. And by group I mean the interaction among members in the group, not just young people in a setting in which they're acting as individuals. So there they learn to contribute to the group and to learn directly and indirectly from the group through both talking and observed behavior. It's good to keep in mind that some youth are comfortable one-on-one, so they don't fare quite as well in a group environment. They have to learn to feel more comfortable, and other youth really like a small group environment. They're much more active in sharing, and still others prefer a really large environment, where there are lots of teens and they can kind of stand up and speak to their peers. So it's important to offer youth an opportunity to engage in all of those kinds of settings and to find their place and their comfort level. It also, in terms of learning, teens, not unlike adults, need clear guidelines and instruction. The lack of clarity in guidelines and instruction can make people, and it certainly can make teens uncomfortable, and can put them in a position where they prefer not to act because they really don't know exactly what's expected of them. So here we want flexibility so that youth can explore, but we also want guidelines so that they're clear about what they should be doing. Learning to do research through experience is very different from the most learning experiences that many young people have had. Also, learning through active engagement, immersion in their own communities is very different. The young people don't think of themselves necessarily as learning from their environments, and so getting involved and learning to ask questions in environments that are their everyday environments is a different experience for them. So figuring out how to make that comfortable is part of the facilitator's role. Okay, so let me go on to some language having to do with best facilitation practices. So you'll see on your screen best practices based on experience in the literature. These are really sort of guides for facilitation. And we use a particular language that is helpful to us and hopefully will be to you. So the first point is that a good facilitator builds on and extends what youth know and what they say. So we call that scaffolding. For any of you who are educators, you've probably heard that term. Everybody feels good when we scaffold. Nobody feels good if somebody tries to produce an alternative point of view without saying, yes, I understand what you mean. Yes, that's a really good idea. Let me add something. So we want to try to facilitate a scaffolding process so that everyone is contributing, building on each other's points, and coming to understand each other. Motivation. Enthusiasm on the part of a facilitator is really important. Really motivated, interested, energetic. Now, people express their energies in many different ways. Some are kind of more subdued, some are less. But the power of your interest in the issue and in youth will come through. So it's important to see yourself as a facilitator, as a motivator, and as an encouraging person that moves youth on to the next step. Critical thinking and problem solving. Those are work activities. I won't give you, there are many different work activities that are included in your curriculum that promote the kinds of critical thinking and problem solving that are necessary in YPAR. I've used the term multiple intelligences, meaning the different ways that youth engage in learning in their environments. And facilitators, when creating exercises, need to assess a group. In fact, there are exercises for groups to assess their own sort of where they fit on the multiple intelligences spectrum. They fit in lots of different places. And figuring out how they can complement each other in a group. So a good facilitator pays attention to that. I'm not sure about time. Helping youth to reflect is very important. Engaging young people in reflecting on what they've learned, how relevant it is to them, how they have engaged with others in the process is all very important in the PAR learning experience. Questioning, everyone has talked about the importance of encouraging young people to ask questions, openly ask questions and explore. Modeling, sometimes it's very important for a facilitator to show how it's done or to work with a youth or a group of youth to model an exercise so that it's clear how it can be operationalized. It's also very important to create an environment where teens are encouraging other teens. I think Julie has also talked about this. We'd rather, of course, supportive adults are both teaching and learning at the same time and may have technical expertise or other information to provide, but I think it's best to consider that a supportive environment encourages teens to support each other and does not necessarily encourage adults to push teens to do something. So support is the word that we need here. We need guided and direct instruction. Facilitators can instruct directly by specifying and clarifying and explicating, but instruction can also be guided by asking questions, providing information, suggestions, summarizing, sort of encouraging, subtly encouraging a discussion to move towards closure. All of that is guided and helps young people to feel that they're being helped, but they themselves have control over their learning process. It's useful to be clear about what the goals are. Goals for the day, goals for the week, goals for the month, goals for the project, because everybody likes to feel like they're moving towards accomplishing something, both in the short term and the long term. Sometimes there are conflicts that may arise in a group. Oftentimes there are conflicts that arise on many different levels. So facilitators have the responsibility of trying to help young people to sort out sort of where the source of the conflict lies and to help to negotiate differences of opinion or other kinds of arguments that may come from something that's entirely outside of the classroom or learning setting. So knowing your group is really important. It's not on the list. It's not in the slides, but maybe first and foremost is knowing your teens one-on-one as a group, spending time with them, learning what their lives are about. If you have an opportunity to do it, going home with them if you can do that, having them walk you around the community, seeing things through their eyes. Okay. The next set of slides have to do with the levels of engagement that we have been mentioning, the individual level, the group level, and the large group or collective, whole collective. The what do we call it? The committee of the whole, the cow. So the individual thinking, well, does Oregon have cows? Okay, so you're all making cows. So at the individual work is really important, especially for people who aren't comfortable thinking on the spot. It gives an opportunity to reflect, to think about, who you are and how to express yourself. It allows young people to develop their thoughts on a topic so that they can participate on an equivalent level with everybody else, develop material to share that is theirs. It gives them time for independent research, and different people have different ways of gathering information, so I've just suggested a few here on this slide. And it offers an opportunity for very important reflection that helps young people keep track of what they're experiencing and what they're learning and how they're learning it and how they're growing. The small group, I think we've talked about, Zuli has talked about extensively, but let me just run through the idea of learning in small group. That is pair. First we had think, now we have pair. By the way, think, pair, share may not be language that you use there, but it's language that's used in Connecticut when teachers are interested in, creating these interactive learning environments in their classrooms. So it's kind of useful rubric. So small groups are places for young people to share information and knowledge, to set their goals, to have really solid and detailed discussions about topics or methods or what they would like to achieve. To share group accomplishments in greater depth, and to prepare themselves for pooling their results in a larger group discussion. And those small groups need guidelines. They also need roles for group members, and they need to have, it's best to have outcomes that members of the group may decide on themselves, but they should be productive. It is a learning place for sharing and generating new information. And now the cow. This is the large group. The large group is often the most challenging because many times many members of the group may not feel comfortable speaking in a large group, so the facilitator is called upon to make sure that everybody contributes at least once to a large group discussion. It's where small group work and sometimes individual work is communicated, discussed, where people can display their work on the wall or through performance and talk about it, where the thinking of the group can be summarized, listed, prioritized, where models can be built, and where the whole picture can be accumulated, the collective of what everybody has been learning. It's also a way to provide feedback to small groups. If small groups present, then other small groups can provide commentary. It can be a learning experience to help young people feel more comfortable speaking in a large group. It's a place to build consensus, and in the process of YPAR, we need consensus. Okay, in sum, all of these processes are intended to build many skills and capacities. Sometimes we measure them, sometimes we don't. How am I doing? Okay. But it's very important in the exercises and activities that are developed to just keep these skills in mind and to help young people in your group reflect on them and think about themselves as learning in these areas. So the areas that are designated here, which by no means are the only areas of concern and consideration, are thinking skills, communications and social skills, persuasive skills, since we're really talking about social change and social advocacy, technical skills that stem from the sort of technical aspects of research, and job readiness skills, because all of the YPAR activities can be framed in the context of readiness for work, readiness for next stages in education, and readiness for life. So I think I'll stop here, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to respond to them.
Thanks, Jay. This is Liz. So we had two questions come in, and one we think was actually from Zuli's presentation. So Zuli, we're going to unmute you. So if you could also unmute yourself. We believe this question is for you. Do youth have to fill out the daily rating sheets, or could we post numbers on the wall that the youth stand under and have an open discussion about it? Do you have any recommendations? And this is just with the intention of keeping young people up and moving.
So was the question that whether they could do just the sheet or do an activity as a large group?
Yeah, so I think do they have to fill out the daily activity rating sheet, or could it be an exercise that they do with Post-its on the wall and have an open discussion about it?
Before, as a sort of on-the-spot rating, daily rating, I actually had them do it as a group because I forgot to make copies of the sheet. So absolutely, and it did give us a chance to have a conversation about some of the activities as a group. I think the sheet allows for individual reflection about an activity. So not just providing space to talk about how it could be better for the group, but maybe how it could be better for that particular person, their set of skills, the way that they learn, etc. So do you have to do the individual activity rating sheet? No, not necessarily. I do think that doing it as a large group and doing it with larger posters or Post-its allows for a group conversation, which I think is very important for group building.
Great, thank you. And then the second question is, do you have any examples, and I think this could be to Jay, do you have any examples of how to effectively balance giving youth clear guidelines and instruction while ensuring that the projects are youth-led? And I think that's a really good question central to this.
Okay, I have to think about that for a minute.
And if you would like to think about it for more than just a few minutes, it's something that you can ruminate on, and we can come back to it at the end.
I think that the guidelines are meant to facilitate youth participation. So, if, for example, the exercise is trying to identify, let's say in small groups, what priority topics might be, then the openness is in the way that the group engages with each other in conversation. It's in the discussion and selection of topics, and even possibly in the way that they come to agreement or disagreement about the topic itself. But the structure lies in the goal for the activity and some guidelines for going through an exercise to identify topics and a desired outcome. So that might be one example of the exchange and the balance that might take place between the facilitator and the group. I don't know if that's helpful.
No, I think it was helpful, and if there's additional questions from the attendees, I mean, I think that's a thread that we could also pick up during the Q&A session at the end of our presentation as well.
Liz, can I make a comment? I'm sorry, it's Jay. It's just a follow-up on that. One of the biggest mistakes that every single one of us has made is to say, this is a youth-run, youth-led program, so we're just going to let youth do whatever they want to do. And usually, I mean, over time, maybe that works out, but generally that doesn't work out very well because youth don't have a clear sense of what they're supposed to be accomplishing. They're not familiar with the curriculum, and they don't have, they haven't been helped to figure out what sort of what they would like to focus on and what they would like to change. So, so I think the issue of balance is really important. And I've just given you an example of unbalance on the other end. It's not too much structure, but too much no structure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so those were all of the questions that came in through the question box. So at this point, we're going to shift control over to Dan as our final panelist. Just do that now, and then we will unmute Dan. All right, take it away, Dan.
Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So that's actually a really great segue because I think I'll be talking a lot about things that we're mentioned in the other parts of this presentation, but I'm going to go into a little more detail about a few of them. So, sorry, it's not actually going over. There we go. So in this section, I'll be focusing on three main challenges especially relevant to YPAR. And these are developing an effective facilitator-youth partnership, which Jay was just talking about, facilitating consensus building throughout the YPAR process, and then linking research and action, which is something Heather had mentioned earlier. And so to discuss these challenges in more detail and to provide some hopefully helpful takeaways, I'm going to use a project that we've been working on at ICR as a sort of case study. And so Lead by Example, or LBE as I'll probably call it most of the time, is a teen-led substance abuse prevention campaign with high school students in West Hartford, Connecticut. And some things to note about this campaign: this is a long-term project, so we started working in West Hartford with high school students in 2010, and since then the work has grown into a campaign that the students have really taken the lead on and coordinate. We incorporate YPAR principles into the campaign, so we train LBE participants in how to collect, analyze, and disseminate research as part of their campaign, and to incorporate research into their action strategies and messaging. So as I discuss these common challenges in many YPAR projects, I'll use specific examples from our LBE project to show how we attempted to overcome these challenges, and then I'll provide a few takeaways from each example. So one challenge, and as I said, Jay was just referencing this, one challenge in YPAR is figuring out how to build a partnership between you as the facilitator and the youth you're working with. And I think it's easy to talk about the importance of a youth-adult partnership, but what does that really mean? And what does it mean to support youth within a YPAR environment? Youth may come in with defined expectations of roles based on their normal experiences or interactions with adults. So for example, they may think that since you are the adult, you're supposed to teach and they're supposed to learn. But this is a very one-directional interpretation of learning and not really the type of partnership you're looking for in YPAR. Something that can be especially challenging is figuring out how to support youth in a partnership. In other words, what does it mean to support youth in their work? And how do you work as partners with youth and make sure that you find a balance between providing youth with the support they need without taking on too much of the responsibility yourself and inadvertently creating the more one-directional style of teaching and learning? So the example I'll provide here is from a summer project that the Lead by Example team took on when they decided to build a website for their campaign. And the website was something that youth involved in the project thought was important for the campaign. This was something they identified as a need. So at ICR we organized a summer internship opportunity focused on making the website and building more of a social media presence. And we offered paid internship opportunities to the youth who were already part of the Lead by Example campaign. The website was a really large project with a lot of different components, so first we had to divide up tasks. And we wanted to ensure that youth still felt ownership over the work and they were contributing. But with that said, obviously we couldn't just ask them on the first day to start making a website on their own. None of them had the experience to do that. And really, as facilitators, we didn't have that experience either. We did create a rough outline to the internship they could follow, so they felt like there was some structure and clear next steps during the process. The youth interns took the lead on key components for researching websites that appealed to teens and why that might be, reviewing other similar sites on substance abuse prevention, choosing the theme for the site, writing content, and developing the layout of the site. We also brought in an expert who could work with the group to provide technical support for building a website, and the teens worked with him to make most of the key decisions. So what was our role as facilitators? Most importantly, it was listening to what the youth said and creating opportunities for them. For example, developing the summer internship opportunity and finding an ally with website development experience who could provide support to the teens. The teens also wanted to interview other youth for the website, so we provided training on interviewing and collecting quotes from people, including how to create an interview guide, how to get informed consent, and how to analyze interviews and identify key quotes. So again, they came up with the idea and they did the work, but we provided the training and support so they could accomplish their goals. They decided they wanted to create a logo and merchandise that could be on the website and collect photos with youth they could use on the site. So we also found someone who could create sample logos based on their initial design ideas, and the youth could choose the final logo. Sorry about this. so some takeaways here. It's important to emphasize from the beginning that this is a partnership and you're not consulting the youth for ideas, so you're working with them as a team. It's not that they suggest what to do and then you go out and do it, but you're providing support for them to do the work they want. So for example, again, when they said they thought it was important to have a website, we didn't just go out and build the website for them. But at the same time, I also didn't just ask them to build the site on their own without giving them the support, structure, and training they might have needed. This is what we mean by facilitators supporting youth. It's important to put youth in a position to succeed. So again, providing that structure and training for the steps they want to take. Again, in the example I provided, we provided training and interview methods so they could go out and collect quotes for the website. This is something the youth wanted but needed our support in the form of training. A way to think of this is that both you and the teens are bringing different experiences and skills into this partnership. So partnering effectively means that you're incorporating those strengths that everyone has with them into the process. Another challenge in facilitating a YPAR project is building consensus, and this is another point that Jay had brought up earlier. So obviously a more democratic, participatory environment is great, and that's what you're working toward, but how do you know in that process when to encourage debate and constructive dialogue, and when to push the group to come to an agreement? And also, what happens when there's disagreement or you feel frustrated because they can't fully express their ideas? How do you make sure everyone has the chance to participate? There are many times where consensus is needed. A key principle to effective YPAR is building a positive group dynamic. So there are a lot of major decisions made during the YPAR process that require group dialogue that leads to a consensus everyone feels comfortable with. These include issue identification, building a model, determining which research methods to use, analyzing the data and figuring out what it means, and deciding how to use the data to create action steps. For things such as issue identification, different methods to use, and what types of actions to take, it's also important to provide context to those discussions. So putting an important decision up for a vote without providing more information about why it should be done, what outcomes you hope to see from it, and how it connects to the rest of the work being done can make it difficult for youth to come to an agreement or feel comfortable with the decision, even if they can't necessarily explain why. So I'll use another example from the LBE campaign to show how we try to foster consensus building. This example is from when a group of teens were designing a research model for their campaign and identifying what factors they thought influenced peer norms that encourage substance use. Obviously, that's a difficult question with a lot of possible responses. There's no one right answer. So we use many strategies to encourage critical thinking, dialogue, and consensus building. We started with a large group discussion about peer norms and substance use. Open discussion and dialogue is important, obviously, but we didn't just have a group discussion and then have them try to create a model. We went through different activities to help the youth build on their own ideas and understand each other's opinions more clearly. We had them do an individual exercise, and then they worked in small groups, then came together as a whole group to explain those group similarities and differences and negotiate to the point where they could create one group model. We used the individual activity to give youth time to reflect on their own position. When they worked in small groups to encourage negotiation, dialogue, and critical thinking around their own ideas, then they shared with the whole group to negotiate and identify what they could agree upon as a team. And we wanted them to start thinking critically about these different factors that influence their issue. And throughout the activities, they're constantly clarifying their viewpoints and definitions and also learning how others may have different opinions. So some takeaways here. One, building consensus takes time. And I think as a facilitator, it's important not to try to rush through the process too quickly just because you're concerned about moving on to the next step. It's important to introduce different ways of sharing information. So as I was mentioning, group discussion, written reflections, interactive activities, work with partners or small groups, this will all help the youth better understand their own positions and opinions so they can share them more clearly with others. Also, it's important to develop a positive group dynamic at the beginning of the program because this will make building consensus a lot easier going forward. It's important to respect others' opinions while also being willing to disagree or challenge them if you don't fully understand. And it's important to make sure everyone feels as though his or her voice is being heard and respected. That's why it's so important to create these opportunities for people to share their opinions through different outlets. I think Jay had mentioned this earlier, but not everyone is comfortable speaking in front of a large group. So providing those spaces for smaller group discussion and individual reflections or more creative expression will let people contribute in different ways they feel comfortable with. A third challenge, and to me it's probably one of the more complicated ones, but also one of the most important, is figuring out how to balance and link research and action throughout the YPAR process so it's integrated. And I think there's a tendency to think of YPAR as a linear process. So first you do the research, and then you analyze it, and then you take action based on that research. But as Heather was mentioning at the beginning of this webinar, really research and action should be integrated together throughout the cycle of your project. This is especially important when you're working on a short time frame and with limited resources. Otherwise, you might end up feeling like you took up so much time designing your research model and training the youth in conducting research that you don't leave enough time to actually take any kind of action. I'll use an example to explain this a little further. So during the last school year, we were having a discussion with some of the Lead by Example teens about a high school drug and alcohol survey that the schools collect every 2 years. And the teens hadn't seen the results of those surveys and felt like their peers didn't care very much about them because they never found out the results anyway. So they started developing a strategy to share the results of the survey with their peers while also collecting new information about how students interpreted the results. The LBE teens analyzed the drug and alcohol survey results and identified key findings the group wanted to share with their peers that were relevant and related to the focus of their campaign. The teens then filmed short man-on-the-street style interviews with students in which they asked about the survey results and got responses. So for example, they asked, what percentage of students do you think drink alcohol in your school? The student being filmed would respond, and then the teen would tell them the correct answer and film their reaction. They put these clips together in a video and got permission from the school administration to show the video during homeroom in every classroom. So they were able to reach the entire population of the school and share the survey results related to their campaign messaging, which was an action strategy. And at the same time, they were collecting new information about students' perceptions compared to the actual results of the survey. And then to assess their impact, they administered a brief pre- and post-survey in the homerooms to collect information on the impact of their video intervention. So some takeaways here. In this example, research and action were integrated, so you don't need to wait until your information is fully collected and analyzed to then start taking action. Sometimes collecting and sharing information is part of your action. Here, youth were sharing information with others, which was one of their actions, while at the same time collecting new information or collecting research. Think about doing things in close proximity to one another in terms of time. So I included an image of the YPAR spiral that Heather had referenced earlier. And I won't go into another explanation of it here, but I think it's valuable to really think of your work as cyclical rather than linear. And really view each part of the research process as action as well. As you conduct research, you're making connections with people, gathering information, building allies, and the information you collect may shape or reshape the way you're thinking about the problem or what steps you want to take to address it. And then the last comment I'd like to make is that obviously no YPAR project is perfect, and you'll always be able to reflect on your work and see ways you could have made it better or done something differently. But if you think of the process as embedded within this YPAR spiral, then you'll start to see how your work is always building on itself and moving toward longer-term systemic change. And that's all I had, so I guess we can open it back up for questions.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, this is Liz. So we had a couple of questions come in through the chat box. And at this point, folks, attendees on the webinar, we've got just over 10 minutes allocated for this question and answer period. You have a couple of options. You can continue to type in your questions through the question box, or if you would like, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can verbally ask your question to our panelists over the line. So we'll also unmute all of our panelists at this point so that anybody can respond. So we'll start with the questions that came in through the chat box. And one of them is if you could provide some examples of the project or research that young people have done. And I could actually, this is Liz again, I could actually provide a couple of examples that we've done with the previous curriculum that we used here in adolescent and school health. One example that I participated on was working with a group of young people in a low-income high school. And broadly, the research project was focused on nutrition, and the young people wanted to focus on why students in their school choose or choose not to eat school lunch and school breakfast. And so they did some surveys and did interviews with the lunch staff there at the school and also surveyed both students and teachers to get a sense of how school lunch was perceived both by students and by teachers, and then proposed a few low to no cost policy changes for the schools, mostly around bell scheduling, so that it would enable more young people to eat the universal breakfast that was supplied by the school and still have a chance to make it to their second period. So that's just one example. I don't know, folks at ICR, if you have, you can give just a brief synopsis of some of the research projects that young people you work with are currently working on.
Well, one of the projects that I was going to talk about isn't necessarily a current one, but it was one that I was actually a participant in. It was around teen hustling. It was done here with other youth in Hartford, Connecticut. And teen hustling we had defined as the illegal exchange of money for bootleg CDs, DVDs. That goes to show how old it is. I just said CDs. Drugs, illegal substances, and sex. So the way that we had gathered research, this had originally started as a summer project and then was extended out. We had been split into groups by method, actually, so we were able to collect information from all sorts of different angles. So we utilized interviews, surveys, mapping exercises, pile sorting, visual documentation, and brought all of that together, and the results had shown that teens were saying that they were turning to hustling due to the fact that there weren't many jobs available to that particular age bracket. So there weren't jobs available to teens, so you know, they had wants, they wanted to buy things, but it was also a matter of wanting to take care of some things at home if their home situation meant that they needed to support as well. So from there, some of the actions that we took were getting petitions signed, giving a presentation and bringing those petitions to the legislative office over here, presenting at the Capitol, and eventually in one of the schools over here, one of the high schools, we were able to put a sort of billboard of jobs that were available to teens over here that they had kept in the that they kept up in the career center. So that's just to give you an example of a past project. I think Jay wanted to give a response as well.
Yeah, I can just give you two short examples. One is a long ago example of work in a school in northeastern Connecticut, in which we were working with youth in an after-school program, and they were very concerned that they weren't getting sex education, and in particular, no one was paying attention to the fact that STIs were a concern to the students. They wanted to know more. Some youth were reporting STIs, and they didn't really have an environment where they could talk about it. So teens in this program faced some obstacles from the school because the school wasn't very anxious to focus on anything related to sex education or STIs at the time. But one of the vice principals was supportive of doing work with after-school youth who stayed late, and so our teens did a survey. They created a survey asking about knowledge of STIs and information needed, and administered the survey to quite a large number of teens, and summarized the work, and were able to produce materials and distribute them in the after-school program. So that was a pretty nice example of how things can work even in a complex environment. I won't tell you the second example. We'll save it for the next webinar. It's too long a story.
Okay, thank you, Jay. So we had one more question come in, and this person was wondering if you had any suggestions on how to get releases of the people you interviewed on camera. I'm guessing that means as a part of the research process. That's always a big barrier for them. If you had any suggestions on ways to get releases of information or releases to use their video from your study participants.
This is Dan. I can I can try to answer that. That's really challenging, especially when you're working with youth. To try to get, I think the question was about getting consent from people that your participants are interviewing. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if the person wants
Or
to type in like the clarification on exactly whom the release they're seeking, but I would guess it would be if they were filming an interview.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so the parents don't get angry.
Right,
So.
right. Yeah, that's really difficult, and actually, with youth, especially if they're under 18, it can be really hard. So we had this past summer they were doing the lead by example teens. We had another round of interns, and they wanted to do kind of Facebook profiles of different teens in West Hartford, and kind of take a photo of them and then use some quotes around how they lead by example or things related to that. And to try to get consent for the ones under 18, we had to have the youth sign a youth consent form, and then we also had to try to get a parent consent form. So we tried different strategies for this. We sometimes, if the teen participants knew those youth, they could give them a copy of the parent form, have them sign it, and then try to get it from them. There were a couple times where I tried to contact the parents, so we'd collect, if the teens were out interviewing other teens, they would get parent email addresses or phone numbers, and we could try to contact the parents ourselves. That actually didn't work very well. So we had kind of a backup plan where they would take one photo of the youth with, where you could see their face, and then they'd take another photo they were kind of obscuring their face. So at least we could use the material if we weren't able to get parental consent. Anytime we were able to actually talk to parents, they were on board with it. Sometimes they wanted to hear what their teens had to say before giving consent. But there were some parents that were hard to get a hold of, and we just weren't able to really use that material publicly with their actual image.
Great, thanks, Dan. I think that's really helpful. So does anybody else have any questions or comments that they would like to share? If so, you can do the raise your hand function, or feel free to type that into the question box. So we're not seeing any hands raised or any questions coming through the box. So this is your last call if you have any questions for our panelists before we sign off today. Okay, well, seeing none, Dan, if you would do me the favor of advancing the next slide because you still have control. I will wrap this up, and I want to thank everybody for your time today, and I especially want to thank our panelists from the Institute for Community Research. We're just really excited about this partnership as we continue to roll out youth participatory action research using our new curriculum here in Oregon. And so for attendees, please watch your email soon after this webinar ends for an evaluation survey. Since this is a pilot project and it's a new curriculum, we're really interested in your thoughts and feedback on these different information sharing methods such as webinars. And for our grantees that are on the webinar, stay tuned for more information coming to you about the in-person training coming up in February here in Portland, and our plans for continued technical assistance from our partners at the Institute for Community Research. And if you have any questions or comments or would like more information about the YPAR curriculum in Oregon or about what is up in the adolescent and school health program around YPAR or positive youth development, you can contact me at any time. My phone number is 971-673-0377, and my email is elizabeth.k.thorne@state.or.us. So thank you for everybody for your attention, and everyone have a great day and a great weekend.